This episode of the Tactics Meeting is brought to you by Easy 213. Easily manage resource requests and approvals during an incident or response with offline syncing, secure hosting, automated approvals, and role management. Easy 213 solves that problem of how to do the resource request process. For a free consultation, go to portagebay.com/products/easy213, and we thank them for their support of the Tactics Meeting. Well, it's time for the Tactics Meeting, program where we talk about response tactics and technology, and today we're going to talk about active shooter, a little departure from our normal ICS oil spill focused topics, but an important one as we've had this proliferation of mass shootings around the country, and what, if we're involved, should we do? And today, to help us with that, I have my good friend Randy Ashmore from Training Concepts. Randy has been on the program before. He's a retired U.S. Coast Guard Chief Petty Officer whose family has been training fire, police, military, and general industry since 1967. Randy, welcome to the program.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me. This is great. Great opportunity. Looking forward to talking with you again on this very important and serious topic.
Thank you. Well, it is. We read every day, unfortunately, literally every day, about another mass shooting, or an active shooter in a school, or an active shooter in a mall, and the possibility that any one of us could be at the scene is increasing all the time. And so what is it that we need to know? What is it that we should do? And that's really the topic for today. I mean, we saw the Uvalde shooting down in Texas, where the police waited over an hour to make entry. We saw this pretty descriptive body cam footage of a team that went into a high school and really by the book, and took out the shooter. Um, and that won't be me, that won't be us, but we could be the one, running across the field, or hiding under the table, or trying to lock the door, or trying to call for help. And what is it that we're supposed to do? So before we jump into those details, Randy, can you give us a little bit of your background and the kind of work you've done around training people with active shooter?
Sure. Outstanding, Dan. Now, you're right on target. There's a lot more of these events that we're hearing about and seeing and happening around us. My background, as you said, I'm a retired Coast Guard chief. I spent a little over 20 years in the Coast Guard. And it was interesting because growing up, my family business, my father started in 1967, right after he got out of the Marine Corps. And that was training fire, police, military, and general industry in all sorts of different topics. And one of the things going back into the early 80s, late 70s, was looking at those active shooter concepts. And now we've actually like to expand it out more to not just active shooter, and think about, okay, it could be surviving violent encounters in the workplace, because it doesn't have to involve a gun. It could involve a person with a machete. It could involve a person with 5 gallons of gasoline throwing it on people and they light them. Those are events that have happened, but we don't always equate that to active shooting. Now, a lot of what we'll talk about will tie back into the active shooter role, but we've been training this type of stuff for well over 50 years now, and something I grew up with. And it's interesting to see how things have changed over time. But the mindset you've got to have is, I will survive. And that thing of maintaining situational awareness is so important. I've continued on with, once I got out of the Coast Guard, became an emergency management director in my hometown, and did a lot of active shooter drills, working up in Connecticut, and have done a lot of additional training moving down to Virginia. We actually just completed an active shooter exercise within the school system here a couple months ago, involving local fire, police, and emergency responders, emergency services. And it was great. Always a lot to learn, always a lot of dynamics. That initial chaos is so hard to overcome. But you've got to think about, how am I going to survive? What do I need to do? How do I keep myself safe? How do I keep my family safe? And I don't want anyone to be thinking that we're overly paranoid, but I want you to think about situational awareness as a whole. When you go out to the mall, when you go out to a store, a movie theater, do you have in the back of your mind, what's my escape routes? When you walk into a store, do you look and see where there's a fire extinguisher, where there's an AED, where there's an exit? Do you teach your kids to do that? I remember growing up in Connecticut, as long as I can remember, when I was knee high to a grasshopper, having a family emergency plan where if our house caught on fire, I knew what tree in the front yard I was to make, and that's where our rally point where we were going to meet. If I went to the at the time the Danbury the fair was one of the biggest fairs in the state of Connecticut, and if I got lost or separated from my parents, I was to meet at the big 14-foot Paul Bunyan statue, and that's where I would go. So that stuff has been ingrained in me, and I've tried passing it on to everybody that I've worked with, trained, or been involved with, family members. Wherever we go, if we have something, this is what we got to go do and where we got to go meet, just so that we can be safe and take care of one another. That's kind of where it ties back into. I don't know if that answers your question about my background with it all, but tried rolling it all together for you, Dan.
All right. So planning. You're saying that we should do some planning around these events.
Yep, most definitely. You got to have a plan and think about it. And what is your plan? It's got to be more than just call 911, because a lot of people are calling 911. And not that you shouldn't, you should call 911, but what is your plan? And as you guys have seen in many of the videos that are out there, run, hide, fight, those are 3 key options. Run, hide, fight. So you think about it. I walk into a mall. I'm in a movie theater. I'm sitting there watching a movie. Somebody comes in this door to my right and they start shooting people. What am I going to do? Have I prepared myself? Do I have an exit strategy? Do I duck down? Do I run? What do I do? And that's your first option. Know your routes. Know where you are. You think about in a mall, you're walking down the center channel of the mall, all those stores, they all have loading docks or loading doors in the back. Do you ever think about how to get to those if somebody's coming down the main mall shooting, and get out and then have your rally point that we're going to meet on this side of the mall and have that pre-planned in place? And not too hard, just something to think about and get in the back of your mind. But nowadays, everyone is so involved with these little leashes we have that you see them walking and texting. And I know many people have seen the video of people doing this and falling into fountains, walking out into traffic. Put these things down and look around. Pay attention. Over 90% of all the active shooter incidents that we have recorded and gotten documentation on, there were signs ahead of time. People exhibited strange behavior that was out of their normal purview. The way they were walking, the way they were looking at things, the way the backpacks, they're wearing long trench coats, and it's July in Georgia. Is that normal wear? No. What are they concealing? What are they? Things like that should get the hair on the back of your neck to stand up and say, you know what? Maybe I need to shop here tomorrow. Let's get ourselves out of there.
So, what is the definition of an active shooter, Randy? What when we say that, does law enforcement have something they specifically mean?
That's a great question, Dan. As far as definitions go, I mean, and it's interesting depending on who you talk to, what agency you're looking at. I mean, it's basically real simple. An active shooter, an active killer is described as the perpetrator or mass murder market just that goes out and is actively shooting people. That's kind of like why I like to spread that definition out to include more violent behavior, because they could just be doing a Donnybrook brawling on people, and that could mean harm to mass amounts of people if they're big and strong and they're just wiry.
Yeah, wasn't
So,
there a person in London a couple years ago who ran through the city knifing people?
yep, yep. And it was, I want to say there was 3 military that were on leave on one of the trains that actually got engaged and stopped that person, because they decided that no more. This is going to happen on our train, and they took that shooter, that active violent person down, but he just had a knife. And we had that one in New York 4 or 5 years ago where the guy drove a pickup truck through a crowd of 9 or 11 people. So think about if you're walking the street with this in your face, not paying attention, or you got your earbuds in and you can't hear, and somebody takes and decides to take a rental U-Haul truck or a Penske truck and just run and mow people down. If you're not paying attention to your situation around you, you're going to become a victim. And one of my famous quotes that I always like to use is, do not become a statistic for someone else to use in their safety moment. So pay attention. Have
That's
a
a good
plan.
point. So I know that there are a bunch of different training models out there for active shooter. The only one that I have gone through myself and the one that coincidentally is also on the FBI's website is run, hide, fight. Right? So those are and it has a nice catchy ring to it. It's something that you can remember, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
always important, right? So what is my first option? I'm going to run away. I'm going to put distance between me and the problem. If
Yep.
I can't run, if there's nowhere to go, then my next option is to hide, right? Try not to be found. And if those two things fail and I am left with no option but a face to face encounter, then fight like hell, right?
100%.
Right. And we're not recommending that people do it in the opposite order. I mean, there's a lot of talk about, how do you stop a bad guy with a gun, a good guy with a gun, right? And, uh, there may be cases where that is true, but more people get shot with their own gun than are able to effectively use it against a perpetrator. I mean, there are people, good friends of mine, who go through uh, some pretty rigorous training on the civilian side in order to be prepared, and I'm sure they would manage, and that's great. But I think they're the exception. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree with you 100%. The training aspect is extremely important. The practicality aspect is extremely important. But that run, hide, fight model is a great model. If I can run away, and that is taught throughout every martial arts history out there, any karate class, if you can avoid the fight and get away from it, by all means, get away from it and run. But also, again, have that plan. Where are you running to? You look at the Las Vegas shooting, they were shooting from a high rise building down. So are you running to a place of cover and protection, or are you just running around in the open? So run by all means, but have a plan. Where are we running to? Where are we meeting? Where are we going? So by all means, run, hide, fight. And like you said, hide. If I can bar myself in, and it's funny, all the videos that I see on Run, Hide, Fight, and there's a bunch of them out now, not only the FBI one, but many of the universities have it, and they'll do a simulated active shooter in a school system, and the first thing they do is they try and run. When they go to hide, the teacher is directing all the students, take your belts off and wrap them around the door hangers. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a big movement afoot where people aren't wearing belts anymore.
Yeah,
And I laughed at that. I'm like, yeah. So, if you don't have a
I know
belt,
it. It's because they're walking across the street and their pants are falling down.
you
I
got it.
wear I wear a belt, but I'm an old white guy.
Yeah, I'm with you. I wear a belt too. I got too many things in my pocket that keep pulling my pants down.
And I hang
So,
things off of them, right? I got my knife. I got my belt is a utility device.
100%. And it's a great thing to think about. Okay, wrap those opening arms with your belt so they can't open. A locked door is a great thing. So if you're hiding, you want to try and secure that door. But think about it. When you go into these places, how does that door open? Most doors open out for allowing emergency egress. So that means I got to stop it from going that direction. Okay, if the door opens inward, how do I do that? And there's a lot of places do have. If you look, you'll find holes in the floor, and they're actually meant for pegs to go in that are usually next to the door. Over the past decade, we have done so much to help people be protected from an active shooter that it's interesting. And we've made a lot of progress on it, and it's good. While you're hiding, shut your ringer off on your phone. Shut your vibrate. Be quiet. Try and keep quiet. Sometimes people are hysterical and you can't. Shut the lights off. Try to remain invisible. But also don't put yourself in a way where people will hide and they'll hide under their desk, close the door, but now they're in an area they can't fight if that's the only option they have, that they are in such a disadvantage. So if you're going to hide, assess your hiding place. And then also, if it does turn worse and I have to fight, are you in a position to fight? So you shouldn't just hide and cower. You should hide and think, what do I have? And you see people grab fire extinguishers, they're going to use them as a club. That's a great tool. But you know what? That fire extinguisher has compressed gas in it that you can spray to blind and distract the bad guy, and then hit him with the fire extinguisher. Think about what you need to do. Throwing things at that person. It's real interesting. People don't realize, growing up, we've been ingrained to play that game of catch. If somebody throws you something, instinctively we catch it just because that's how we grew up. You can throw just about anything. You look at any school, you've got books. Textbooks are hard if you've ever been hit in the head with one of them. So you've got that. You could throw your phone if you had to. You could throw a computer. You could throw textbooks. You could throw your shoes. Picture 15 or 20 people throwing a bunch of things at a bad guy. Is that going to distract them long enough? You go back to the Virginia Tech shootings, and you think about all the football players and stuff that they have there. You can't tell me that somebody, if they started distracting the shooter with throwing things, that they could not have taken and subdued that bad guy. But unfortunately, they didn't. And that's what happens. And it's a hard thing to overcome. And I know everyone's out there that thinks about, I know what I would do. Well, until you're really in those situations, you don't know what you're going to do unless you've really trained in a realistic environment, which goes back to what you're talking about with people that are carrying firearms. That's a great thing. I've carried a firearm since I was 21. That's the first thing I did when I turned 21 was get my concealed weapons permit because I grew up with it. I was also a federal law enforcement officer, and we carried it on active duty when we were doing boardings. But I kept my training going. And I encourage people to get the training and practice and think about those bad situations and how are you going to react. And you think about all these shooters where they talk about they had 130 rounds that they shot. Well, that meant they had at least 1, 2, maybe 5 magazine changes. Unless they're a proficient military person, those magazine changes take a couple seconds. You can do a lot of distraction in a couple of seconds, throwing things at them and make it harder for them to reload and then take them down. I always said, if you're going to fight, though, be aggressive. Fight like your life depends on it, because in these situations, it very well could. And there's that saying that fight like you're the third monkey on Noah's Ark and it just started to rain.
That's a good point. Well, what about, you bring up a good point about train. I mean, people do what they train to do.
Yep.
When you're sitting at home watching the news and you're watching this active shooter, it's like, oh man, I'd have jumped off that building and taken him out, with my spidey powers or whatever. But that's not what people do. People do what they train to do, and in the absence of actual training, people tend to panic. They tend to freeze, like a little kid hiding under the blankets because there's a monster under the bed. You just freeze and hope. And hope is not a strategy. So, when we could talk about individuals, but there's a lot of companies that are concerned about active shooter, and maybe you did build a building that has a active shooter device on the doors for securing it. But if you haven't been taught to use it, and you haven't done it as some kind of a drill, that's just a hole in the floor. You don't know what it's for. You're just looking at it going, man, what idiot built this place with a hole in the floor? All right? You don't even know what it's there for. So when you're giving active shooter training, what kind of exercises or drills do you conduct with these people, and are they receptive to them?
It's all different levels, different types. One thing that I do with my training is I curtail it to our audience. It's going to be different if I am doing a senior citizens home, or if I'm doing a high school, or if I'm doing emergency management and medical. My trainings are a little different because their mindsets are different and what their capabilities are different. And I think you hit it right on the head. There's another quote that I love, and it says, "You do not rise to the occasion, but rather you sink to the depths of your training." So you think about, what training have we gotten? How realistic was it? We've all sat through online training where we've gone click, 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 answer the phone, click, click, and then they check the box. Yep, I've got active shooter training. And then something happens. What do I do?
Right. Well,
And
that's it. That's
it's
exactly it. You're clicking through it with one hand and you're reading Instagram with the other.
Yep. I like to do a lot of realistic base training where I'll have role players and active players that come in. I do one drill I've done with like senior citizens where we'll do have an audience, 20, 30 people. And what I do is I have a glove that's got a little needle in the tongue, in the fingertip, and I got some helium balloons. And then I just start popping them. And I'm like, that's simulating me shooting being a bad guy. Well, I give half the class a bunch of Nerf balls, and they throw them at me while I start to. And I'm trying to fend off these Nerf balls, and I can't pop the balloons. And I'm like, that's distraction. And try to show that. And I can't tell you how many of these people in their late 70s, early 80s are trying to bang me off the head with a Nerf ball, and they're all into it. But they realize that, you know what, they're making a difference by distracting that person, maybe allowing a younger person to tackle me and take it down. So they feel like they are actually part of the solution. So I engage in activities like that. When we're doing EMS, fire, police, I'll actually bring in people that will moulage up. And I love using military vets that have been injured because they are great role players. And they actually have been there, done that, have that mindset, and can help others learn from what they've been through. So I'll moulage them up and have them screaming and yelling. I did one recently where one of my role players, I had them be a child with special needs, that they were on the spectrum of autism, and the noises that were going on in the shoot was just bother. So they were just sitting in the corner rocking and trying to keep the sound away from them. And no matter what any responder did come help, they wouldn't respond. Just to see how our EMTs and paramedics are able to deal and cope with those children that have special needs, because there's not a lot of training that goes on around that. But we were able to use that. And what I do with my training is I don't use it just to check a box. I use it to identify gaps where we need to build additional training. So by identifying the gap that we don't have a lot of people that are trained in dealing with those that have special or functional needs, there's now a training program we're putting in place at the rescue squad to help us interact and learn what we need to do for those with special needs. So that's kind of how I build the programs around it. But even OSHA, if you look at general industry, OSHA says, not active shooter, but in general, training must be realistic and practical in nature. Clicking on a computer is not realistic or practical in nature. So if you really want to be proactive, and there's a lot of places out there that even have the laser simulator trainers that you can go on a range and they walk you through different scenarios. I actually, the one out by laserammo.com, it's a great program, and they've got a bunch of different simulated scenarios that the controller can control. Same scenario, I press the letter K, the bad guy has a knife. I press the letter G, they've got a gun. I press the letter C, and they're compliant. So exact same scenario, I can change it up multiple ways and see how you deal with that. And some of the scenarios are, you're working in your backyard and somebody comes up down your driveway and says, "Hey, I've got some asphalt down here. We're just finishing up a job. If you give me $100, I'll pave your driveway. We'll be done." And when you're like, "Nah, not really interested," they're like, "Well, how about you go inside and give me your money?" And they pull a gun. How many people carry their own firearm at their house when they're out in the yard doing yard work? Are you trained to thinking of things like that?
And do we really
So,
want them to? I don't
yeah,
really want them
exactly.
to.
How far do you want to go with that? So it's just thoughts to think about. And I don't want people carrying firearms that aren't trained to use them. I want people that are trained, comfortable, confident, and act as on good faith. I'm a strong believer. I've carried, like I said, for many years now. But I also spend probably a few hundred hours every year going through additional training to maintain my currency and proficiency with it.
Yeah, not everybody does that. What about kind of lockdown training, teaching people, that you're in a suite of offices in a building, there's an active shooter. Uh, Do you teach people to secure those spaces?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Look at, like I said, when you're doing your planning, what spaces, you think about how many places do you go to in a year that are new versus how many times you go to the same place over and over again.
I go
Usually,
over and over again, right? I go to the same grocery store. I generally use the same gas station. Yeah, I mean, it's from home to Safeway to Costco to the two restaurants that I prefer, and that's kind of it.
we're creatures of habit. That's humans. We're creatures of habits. So when you go to these places over and over again, maybe take a little bit of time and think about, okay, what is that hole in the floor? Where is that bar that they used to lock that at? What do we do? And if you get to know the people that are working there, have you guys ever done a lockdown drill? Yeah. Next one, can I be involved with? So if I'm in here and something does happen, I know what to do. Nothing wrong with asking and just being proactive on it. Again, building your plan, thinking about what do I do. Now, contrary to that, sometimes nefarious or bad people do nefarious things, or they learn these procedures so that I can lock the door from you not having an escape route. So you gotta balance the odds out here and find what's going to work right for you in your areas. But if you go to the same places all the time, the exits don't change that often. So I always like to look at one of the common things we often see that it gets cited in OSHA and safety management is egress routes are blocked. They don't maintain the proper channeling. They don't maintain the proper width. Boxes, pallets, things get stacked in front of them. So again, when you walk in, look around. How am I getting out? Where's my back exit? Where's the bathroom? If I need to secure myself, bathrooms are good places, but they don't have a lot of exits. If you're in there, it's pretty much your last ditch to lock yourself down. But little thoughts like that. And I always go back to if you ever heard of Jeff Cooper. Jeff Cooper is the founder of Gunsight. He has the Cooper model of colors, and they talk about he's got four main colors: white, yellow, orange, and red. White, when you're asleep, you're in white. You don't have a lot of situational awareness. You're dreaming in la la land and happy, and that's great. You
That's
feel
actually
safe in your
me,
home.
me most
Yeah.
of the time.
When you're out and about, you should be in that they consider yellow. Yellow, cautious, just like a red, yellow, green traffic light. Cautious. What's going on? Don't be doing this. Be looking around, paying attention. What are people doing around you? And watch and pay attention. When you step into that orange color, something drew your attention. Maybe somebody's acting a little suspicious. Maybe they're wearing that trench coat in July. Doesn't look right. Yeah. You focus your attention, excuse me. And when you get into red, something really drew your attention. That means that something's going to go down. Excuse me, Deb. The hairs in the back of your neck start to stand up. The problem is as you get up in those higher colors of orange and red, you start losing that total 360 situational awareness and start getting that tunnel vision. So we want to watch out for that as well. Something's in the air. But you look at those color models and you think about it. There's been actually training all the way back to World War II. The Brits did a real neat training where they took 200 sentries and they trained 100 of them to pay attention to the little hairs in the back of their neck, that inner instinct, that feeling that something isn't right. And then they trained these people for weeks to do this. The other 100 they left alone. And then they put them on sentry duty, on watch. And there's something in a high 70, 80 percentile mark where the sentries that were trained to trust their inner instincts weren't able to be taken down as quickly, if at all. Whereas the other sentries that weren't trained and were just focused on their normal things, they were taken down a lot more often. And it shows, you think about today's technology versus 100 years ago when cowboys were cowboys and out riding the Wild West. How did they know which direction to go? How do they know where St. Louis, Missouri was or where Carson City was? They felt it. They knew it was that direction.
They
They
didn't
could
look it up
feel it.
on their. They didn't look it on their phone.
Yeah, the GPS.
Yeah,
Yeah. So it's fascinating. We have gotten out of tune. We've relied so heavily on technology that we've gotten out of tune of our instincts. And those instincts, you've heard mother's intuition, it's out there. If you can hone in on those, something doesn't feel right, trust those guts. There's a lot of interviews after people that missed their plane or got off of plane crashes or didn't go to an event or something. They're like, I was supposed to be there, but I didn't. and they're like, something just told me I shouldn't go. Well, they listen to those. Now, it's hard to sort the wheat and the chaff on this nowadays because there is so many things, and I don't want you being paranoid. I just want you thinking about it. Trust your gut. When something really knots up and says, maybe we shouldn't go shopping today. Well, there's a reason. Pay attention to find out what that reason is. Trust those inner instincts and keep yourself safe. Use those colors to your advantage. And I also encourage you, anyone, to look at Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, a retired Army colonel. He's a psychologist. He came up through the ranks, enlisted all the way up, and he's an author. He's got multiple books out. The one of them, actually, two of them are on the United States Marine Corps Commandant's required reading list, and it talks about psychology, killing, shooting, being prepared. He has a video series out called The Bulletproof Mind. And back to that mindset, you've got to have the mindset, I'm going to survive. And then, how am I going to survive? I have a plan. I'm going to use run, hide, fight. That's my plan. Where am I going to run to? If I need to hide, how am I going to hide? And if I've got to fight, I'm going to fight aggressively. I'm going to surprise and do what I have to do to keep my family safe and keep myself alive. Because there's a lot that Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman talks about with survivor's guilt. Those that didn't do anything, let others die because they couldn't do anything. So some stuff like that to think about. And I know I totally went down a different rabbit hole than we were talking originally, but hey, you're hanging with me.
No, that's great. I don't where we can bring training to a company or an organization, but I don't know where an individual goes if they think, oh, I need some training. But I like your point about trying to develop a level of situational awareness. I know that when I check into hotels and I get on my floor, I look for the stairs and I look for the fire extinguishers, but I don't do that every time I go into a restaurant or I was going to say mall, but I haven't been in a mall in like 10 years. Are there malls left anymore?
There are, but they're definitely far and few between. They're a little bit more sparsely populated nowadays, but there are some out there.
But I do go to airports, and airports, there's a lot of doorways and passageways and stuff off of concourses um, where you could go. It says restricted and whatnot, but the door's unlocked, likely it's not, and you can get through there. So, I mean, that's probably a big risk point. Even with TSA, I don't know how effective TSA really is. You probably have thoughts.
Again, it goes back to the root training. TSA, you look at use of force continuums, you look at level of training and protect. Think about the millions of bags that they're checking every single day. And if a bad person wants to get through security, they will find a way. So they're doing their best. They're doing a lot of stuff that's out there. But if a bad person wants to get through, they will get through. And it might not be with a firearm. It might be with an improvised weapon that's out there that they could find. So they're doing their best. But it is very challenging when you look at metal detectors, look at the equipment that's out there. So they're doing their best is what I'll leave it at.
So if your organization, hasn't had training in this kind of arena, if you've got a bunch of people in an office that uh, would be required to lock down in the event of an active shooter, then they should get some training, right?
Agreed. And a lot of people go back to the NIMBY principle. Not in my backyard. That won't happen to me. That's elsewhere. Well, things are happening all over. So you think about, that's why I like to expand it out. Recognizing and surviving violent encounters in the workplace. It's somebody's workplace. It could be the post office. It could be a movie theater. It could be whatever store you go to. It's somebody's workplace. And you think about recognizing, and I'm sure people have had to deal with layoffs and firing of people. You may have a disgruntled employee or something. So those are things to pay attention to. What do you do and how do you prepare? And having those drills, having that training, having those tough discussions, and not just say, "Not in my backyard, won't happen to us." You got to open up and talk about it. Sometimes it's hard to have those discussions because you don't want to think about it, but you have to. And that even goes with family members. You've got to have those things. I've implemented something this year with my family called Terrible Tuesdays. On Tuesday, we pick a scenario, and that can be everything from, an earthquake happens, I'm deployed elsewhere, and how do we deal with that? Or you come home and you find the front door's been kicked in. What do you do? Or worse comes to worse, I'm traveling and I die in a car crash. How does my family deal with that? And what do they have all the information they need to contact the right people to get all the stuff in order? So Terrible Tuesdays is something we started implementing, and we had fun with it. We've actually done house clearing and room clearing drills and things like that, just for fun, for added training. But think about what could go wrong and have those hard discussions with family, with coworkers, with friends, and find out how we're going to do this and be safe.
And we did something similar. We did a Saturday power outage drill where we actually ate the MREs that we had stuck around. Right.
That's a great thing. I tell people all the time, if you're stocking up on survival food for those hurricanes, tornadoes, power outages, and stuff like that, you want to try that food before you actually have the event, because there's certain preservatives in some foods that people react to. There's a certain brand of freeze-dried food that my stomach does not like, and if that's all I have on my shelf, I'm going to have a miserable time with it. So I now know that. We quite often, usually 2 or 3 times a summer, we'll have MRE parties, or we'll have survival parties, power outage parties, just like that, just to try it.
And also open those packets and remember, I mean, it's simple, right? I mean, I add a little bit of water in the reactive heater, but yeah. You know, if you've never done it, then so open it up, take a look at what's in those packets, you know, and enjoy that little baggie of freeze-dried coffee and that little bit of chocolate bar.
There you go. Take the powder of hot cocoa from meal number 5, mix it up with some water, and then put it with meal number 4, the pound cake, and make a chocolate-covered pound cake. You can have fun with this stuff.
There you go. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for now, but thank you, Randy. In summation, you know, take the time to make a plan for yourself, for your family, for your business, and if you need help making that plan, you can reach out to Randy Ashmore. I'll put his email address in the show notes. I'm sure he's happy to give you some resources.
Perfect.
Randy, thank you for coming on the program.
Appreciate it. Thank you much. Stay safe out there, stay healthy, and smile often.